Happy Friday, my friend.
Happy Friday to you, Carlos. How are you today?
Very good. In the morning you have to pump yourself a little bit. What
I
are
know.
you, a tea person or a coffee person in the morning?
Oh, coffee. Yeah, I never had coffee until first cup of coffee I had. I was in Army basic training at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and I was working KP. And this is not a made up story. It may sound made up just based on, but when you worked KP, you got to have a little bit of extra food and drink. And we're so dog tired because we get up at 4:30 in the morning, go nonstop until 9 o'clock at night, and somebody else was having coffee, and I never even tried it. And so that was when I had my first cup of coffee. Now it wasn't very good because it was, just black coffee and whatever, but army coffee too. But yeah, I'm much more of a coffee person. A tea is something like I think my grandmother maybe had us drink tea with her and have tea and cookies when we were little. But what about you? You coffee, you
So
espresso? What are
I'm
you?
I'm
You're a
I'm I'm
high
a, I'm
high
a
caffeine
full,
guy, I'm betting.
I'm a high caffeine guy. So it's funny. In Latin America, they gave the kids coffee on the bottle because they normally, like, the mom or the dad is drinking. So then what they do is that they take the whole bottle of milk and they put like a couple of drops, like change the color. So they think, hey, here's your cup of coffee. Go away, have fun. Um, but I remember my dad, for breakfast, having my dad is he was a woodworker, so he had this big shop that he used to make all these nice things made out of wood. So our breakfast was like yuca, eggs, ham, cheese, and a big cup of coffee. So I
Sounds pretty
always
good.
start the yeah, I start the day every day with my cup of coffee. Now I have an espresso machine downstairs. Um, but I need to get a good cup of coffee in the morning. Doesn't matter where I'm at, and it has to have milk. Without milk, I don't think that it. There's some that says, well, good coffee should be drinking black. And then I'm like, no, it need to have some milk.
So it's too bitter for me. I can't, the taste of it is just not doesn't do it for me. So yeah, I'm with you.
We discuss a lot of different topics in this show. For our audience, if this is the first time, make sure that you subscribe. Our idea is to have a conversation like we have with a friend or with someone, and we both are in the technology field. And we love to. I don't consider myself a geek, but sometimes we geek out about some things. Uh, but I think that
Carlos,
security and
you failed the self-awareness test already for today, but that's okay. Continue. Go on in your opening.
uh, it's interesting because we constantly are being bombarded with different messages
Hmm.
from you need this product or you need this other thing. And we try to have the conversation here like if we were talking to someone else in regards to what is truly what they should be looking at. Because at the end of the day, we're people. And if we can interact as people and understand what are the challenges, I think that that's very important. I don't want to get somebody calling me at 2 o'clock in the afternoon or at night, hey, we're having a problem. And I think that there's a couple of tips that I think that we have learned across the years that we can probably share with the audience, uh, that they go beyond the products.
Hmm.
And we work for a great company for Datto, and we have great products. But I think that if we start talking about products, some people then glare because they think,
Yeah.
"Hey, I don't want to talk about product," and I normally don't like that. I like to talk about what is the value that could bring to someone.
Yeah, and I think the opportunity is, the concepts that you want to share or that, are beneficial for people to know, um, should be cross product, right? Product agnostic or however you want to phrase it, right? There should be simple things that we can all think about because, to your point, every one of us deals with technology, whether you work in the industry or not, right? If you think about kids, like, we have three kids. Uh, my oldest is about to graduate college. The other one's a sophomore. We got one in high school. The one in high school carries around a Chromebook that's issued by the school, and that's his primary device for everything that he does. Right? He doesn't have many books. Most of the education
Mm.
materials are shared and used through the computer. So kids are growing up digital. Um, we sometimes, kind of pre-COVID, would go out to eat at a restaurant and see people sitting there, like take their phone and hand it to the little one, and the little one sits there, watching a video or playing a game on it the whole time while the parents are having dinner. And we think, oh, thank God that we didn't have our kids during this time, right? Because it's very tempting to just give them like a digital silencer, right? Like, oh, the kid's now busy, versus engaging with them and playing tic-tac-toe or coloring the coloring sheets in the restaurant, right? Those kind of things. But technology is everywhere for all of us all the time. And, uh, from a cybersecurity point of view, everyone is at risk. I strangely, for whatever reason, keep up with my junk mailbox on my Hotmail personal email. Right, keep it clean. Sometimes things that are actually meant for my inbox land there. Keep it clean. But if I scan what goes through there, and I could get 50, 75, 100 messages a day without exaggerating, I manage it. It's empty right now, or it was before I joined the call. Right, it's probably added a few in, because every second of every day stuff is coming our way. So there are some cybersecurity tips and kind of things, concepts that people need to be aware of, no matter what their profession is, whether they're in technology or not. And especially for managed service providers who work with customers of all types and all technology literacy levels, it's really important for them to have this mindset and to share it and be an evangelist for good cybersecurity habits with customers and really everyone that they interact with.
And for the audience, in the video description, you're gonna see a link where you can get what we're gonna be talking about. Because I think that is, like you mentioned, it's really important to one thing to understand that as a technology professional, you have to work with people and you have to be the one probably fixing it or bringing a solution. The thing that is also important, how do we educate the end customer so they understand that, let's say, one of the tips that I remember early on was that you need to do some type of assessment of what is your risk. Because if you don't know what you have, you don't know where are your problems. I remember I worked for a company, and there was this server that it looked, literally on the outside, it looked like a black box. Nobody knew about it. Nobody could say what was running or how important it was. And all of a sudden, we had to do the initial SOX audit. We're talking about probably um, 2002 or three, something like that. And all of a sudden, we do a network scan and we find this thing. And like, okay, I can get into the box through a web browser. I'm like, who can have some information about this? So we didn't know. And then all of a sudden, we start learning the criticality of that server. So we had to literally conduct a security risk and encounter the risk team. And we're not talking about doing that, but like, if we don't know what we have, we don't know what to invest on or how to get help for it.
Yeah, and at some level of doing this risk assessment, it's kind of what, if you were walking in new to a company, right, and you were being hired as the vendor to come in and do the security risk assessment, you need to understand, what do they do for a business, right? What type of information do they handle? Um, are they working with the government? Do they, work with healthcare information, finance? There's a lot of highly regulated industries and have compliance standards and those kind of things. Um, so it's important, obviously, to understand. That's kind of, I think, what people traditionally think about for that kind of risk is the data and those. But the reality, as we know, and we've talked about over the last several weeks, every company is at risk at this point for ransomware. So even if you're dealing with what most people would constitute as, simple information, right? Like, I've got a CRM, it's got our customer information. Maybe we're a manufacturing company, we make products, we sell them online, we ship them out to customers. Well, what happened if all that information got ransomwared, right? It's all locked up, it's all encrypted, you can't access any of it. Can you continue to function as an organization? So there is a baseline to set for everyone, and then that security risk assessment needs to get into, what are the more sensitive information, and then, your point too about systems and tools. what's out there on the network, and then what are the ports on the firewall that we need to open to enable it? What type of security? How are we doing password management? There's so many things to consider. And the good news is there are some preferred tools out there in the market. We won't mention or endorse any, specifically, right? But there are ones that can do those kind of scans, help build that security risk assessment, and then return a report that you and a customer could sit down and review together, and now figure out what is our plan to mitigate the risk that's been reported in this assessment.
And I think that is very interesting because I remember that after doing those assessments, and it happened in small or bigger companies, I think that the next step, or probably tip that I can remember, is that you needed to take the time to probably not dump all the information on the employees, but like start sprinkling it and helping them understand what that information meant for them.
Right.
Like, because sometimes I think that we talk about, yeah, we need to train our employees on cybersecurity, we need to train our employees on the package product, we need to train our employees on all that kind of stuff. But I think that, what does it mean for, let's say, a sales professional? What does it mean for the technology? What does it mean for the, well, you don't call them secretary anymore. I'm dating myself. They're admin assistant, or what we're calling them right now. But like, what does it mean to each member of the team, the findings? Like, it's not,
Right.
oh, well, I don't deal with IT, so that security stuff is for them. Like, I used to have like, do you change your password? Yeah. Okay, let's go in. And then all of a sudden, they lift the keyboard and they have the password under the keyboard.
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah. And it's the same password that they use for everything, right? So I think, the end user education, kind of piece of this is important, because everyone needs to understand that they have a role. They also need to understand that their business email is the greatest source of infection, right? When we come back to ransomware or other cybersecurity threats, phishing attempts, these kind of things, so much of it comes through business email. And so it is looking at those emails, scrutinizing them, right, and having kind of quick decision making around it, right? Like, does this look like a legitimate email from a person that I know? Um, if there's a file attachment on it, right? Like, knowing that that could potentially unleash a virus. So there is a certain amount of end user education that's important, that people understand we all have a role in kind of keeping security. It's kind of like just teaching, your family, right? Like, we lock the doors, we lock the windows, we keep our house secure, right? Like, everybody has a role to play in that, not just the parents, or not just the cybersecurity team within the company, right? Like, everybody has a role to play in helping to keep the house secure, and without trying to overwhelm or kind of put fear into people, right? Like, there are simple things we can do. It's manageable, but then also giving them resources or a place to go. So if they're unsure, they have someone they feel good about. We have part of our Datto University, like Datto U class, when we first joined, right? You and I both went through it. We had a cybersecurity training piece as part of that entry into the company, right? Like, someone from the team came on, they gave us a briefing, they explained what we do and how we do it. But most importantly, they said, if you're ever unsure, here's where to go for help, right? And don't ever feel bad about asking us for help or to take a look at something if you're unsure. We're all in this together, kind of thing. And I think that's a really important takeaway for any kind of end user training.
And you just mentioned something, asking for help sometimes is considered like, I don't want to bother people. I don't know if you have heard that before. Like, sometimes even my wife, when she's like, I don't want to bother you because I know that you're doing a bunch of stuff. But I think that it's not about the bothering part. I think it's, how do we understand how we need to protect our different devices in the network or in the house. And now that a lot of us work from home, now sometimes the company extend that access with different devices. So I think that understanding that now, like you mentioned, the passwords that you use, the devices when you are on the road or when you're connecting. Like, I know that, like, I have on my personal computer, I have an antivirus,
Mm-hmm.
and we had talked about this before. Like, A free antivirus doesn't give you a lot, but when you look at some of the offerings that some of the packages bring, now I have a protected VPN, not only for my PC but also for my phone. So like I
Hmm.
was traveling yesterday, or visiting a customer, and as soon as I logged in to the airport Wi-Fi, the phone detected that that was an unsecured network and VPN automatically to
Yeah.
protect my connection. So things like that that will help you protect. It's also part of what we should be doing with our employees and the networks.
Yeah, and I think making it as clean and simple as possible, right? So a lot of us are used to doing things like multi-factor authentication, right? Is that, you're signing into an application, you're then getting a text message that then gives you a PIN to put in or something like that. I think it's training people in this and kind of putting obviously the technology in place on how to use that, but understanding that people are operating across a wide variety of networks, right? Like I'm sitting in my house, you're sitting in yours. We're both VPN'd into the corporate servers, right? That gives us a secure tunnel there. And then obviously it's the security in the network. But then, like you said, pop off, you go to a coffee shop, you're in an airport. Now are you still on VPN or not? Does it automatically connect? How does it allow the user to function? And so, and just anticipating, this, there's been a lot of talk about, and we talked last time, I think, about how difficult it is to hire, right? And kind of how people need to put a focus on bringing technical talent in, right? There is no more 100% everybody in the office. I don't know that there ever will be, right? Because we've all proven with COVID that we can all get through it. There will be some return to the office. But if you think about it, now you've got access to a global pool of talent who could be anywhere. And there's
Anyway.
good stuff in that, but from a cybersecurity risk standpoint, there's additional risk. And so, how do I secure endpoints that are sitting on an unknown network? Right, that's a huge piece that needs to be addressed as part of any kind of plan.
And I think that bring us up to probably tip number four. That is like, as things are happening in a dispersed or a disconnected type of environment, how do you end up maintaining everyone? I don't want to call it a line, but like to a certain baseline. I remember, and probably I will date myself. Do you remember Landesk?
I do, yeah. I never worked with it, but yeah, I do remember.
So having to deploy software, then SMS, like not the short messaging system, like
Oh no, Microsoft
the
SMS.
Microsoft.
I know that one well because I was working at for a Microsoft partner at the time, and we had a couple of engineers who were among the best at SMS, and it was not a simple product. So yeah,
Yeah,
that we lived through that generation.
you needed to compile. I remember you needed to compile the configuration for the software so that it could be applied. But nowadays, maintaining patches, maintaining OSs, maintaining applications is a simpler process. But
Hmm.
for some reason, some people don't take advantage of it, and like leveraging a platform that can help you with that, like some of the ones that we provide. It's actually very simple, and it doesn't matter if you're on the cloud or you're on premise for servers
Yeah.
or if you're for desktops. All everyone, like even your phone, like people ask me a lot, so why do a phone, and this is a valid question, why does my phone need to get updates constantly? And I'm like, I said, okay, so think about it this way. Somebody created the software and they probably made a mistake, not on purpose, just human,
Yeah.
and they had to fix it. So then you can be protected. That's what a patch is. That somebody at some point found a way around, or the software is not working as expected. But keeping it up to date, I think that we don't compute how much it can affect a business if all of a sudden a patch or something happened.
Well, and that's, there are people like me who, as soon as it pops up and says Windows has an update or whatever, and they're like on it, on it, on it, right? Like, having worked at Microsoft for a long time and we all kind of, the eating your own dog food, right? And, taking new OS builds, pre-release builds, running it, on your production machine as a beta version of an OS. It's kind of risky, but you kind of get used to it. And it's a little addictive, right? You always want to be on the bleeding edge. Then the product releases to the public and you're bored. You're like, when's the next one coming, right? You got to wait 2 years. But now, like, every time an update comes out, whether it's for my iPhone or my computers or iPad or whatever, like I'm always updating, right? If you have an Apple device and you're used to seeing that red, exclamation on the gear, right? Your settings, like, oh, okay, gotta make the updates. But then you have people like my family or others, right? They'll defer, like until it's forced on them, they won't go ahead and push the update. And so I think knowing that you've got a broad spectrum of users, right? If you're a managed service provider, you've got people out there, they're not going to listen to it, they're going to avoid it. If you look at a lot of the exposures and kind of issues that have come up over the last several years, or really for a long time, most of them are exploiting known issues that have been patched. But what the hackers prey upon is the fact that most people don't keep up to date with updates. And all they need to do is find one entry point that hasn't patched that specific issue. They exploit it, and now they're in. And then they can do what they want to do. And so patch management, software updates, those kind of pieces are really key. And there was a time when SMS was an incredibly difficult product to use. The software has matured incredibly over this last 20 years, where it's pretty turnkey. Remote monitoring and management software is its own category. There's a lot of mature products that are out there. We have one of them, of course, but those solutions are out there and pretty well known. And ability to manage and monitor and deploy software and to report success, report issues, to bring notifications back, right? There's a way to centralize all of that management so you don't have to guess. You have awareness of what's on the network at any given time and what the level of patching is to make sure that and quite frankly, to separate it from the network if it's not compliant, right? Like if it doesn't pass these checks, to be able to push it off the network and isolate threats is a huge opportunity as well.
And that then help us with, I would say, tip number 5 is an interesting one that I remember. And sometimes we don't like it because we don't like to create policies or to create a procedure. But I think that you just mentioned something that is, with the tools that we have at our disposal right now, we can actually see what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And even though someone may not want to probably pay for a service, but if you can show them, hey, here's a policy that you can follow here, this will help you, let's say for insurance purposes, this will help you implement and keep your business secure, but creating them in a simple way. Let's say
Mm-hmm.
I have worked for companies in the past that you're allowed to bring your device. So then they provide you with all the tools that you need, and it's like sandbox. I at once worked with an environment that you had your environment, but everything that was corporate was running on a VM. So the
Yeah.
VM was protected to a degree that, okay, so here's all that you can do on the VM on your other environment, go for it. Other environments, you have to use your provided device. And again, there's not one versus the other one. It's whatever you're gonna do, make sure that you know. So there's clear understanding that when an MSP gonna come and support you, they have like a manual that they know, okay, we had a problem through this area. Here's our policy. This is my starting point. What should it be working? How should it work? So then I can go and say, hey, I may need to review something. We may need to do a change.
Yeah, and there's a Reddit thread that I see pop up from time to time because somebody will tag a new comment on it, but it's basically around being asked to put an RMM agent on a personally owned device, right? And like, the MSP is like, should I be doing this? Like, what if you have policies that say yes, you'll do it, or no, you won't do it, or what are the conditions that must be met if you're doing a bring your own device to work kind of thing and supporting that for customers? You would set the policy and the standards, right? Like, here's what it means to be managed. Here's what it means to come on the network, right? Like, and then you'd have some separation in kind of how you're going to address it. But in the absence of having it, having a set of policies to refer to, you're going to get stuck with those kind of awkward questions and then have to figure out what to do. And, do we say yes or do we say no? And how do we message it versus being able to refer back to, kind of put up your policy book. If I put my hand on the screen and say, here's where it says we don't do that unless, these are the conditions are met or something to that effect. So it's a really important piece.
And when we follow the policies, when something happened, then we can go into a recovery mode. We can then go into step number 6 or tip number 6. That is, we need to be able to protect our data. I am one
Yep.
of those that think your data is your currency.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, it's not so much like we may have money in the bank, but do we see all the little bills? Like, we don't see all the little bills. We
Yeah.
see a number that is the data. So you need to make sure that your data is protected. It could be now on the cloud services. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, the other day I was looking, and I personally probably have around 100 different services that I remember that at one point or another I used. And I started thinking about it because of what happened with Meta this week,
Mm-hmm.
that the stock had a little challenge. And I'm like, okay, so my data is in so many different places. Do I protect my data? And at one point, I took a decision. I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a way that I can protect my data on a day-to-day basis consistently, so I don't have to worry about if something happened to my equipment. Because, like, um, probably, I don't know if you were a road warrior or not, but for the last probably 15 years, probably travel about 40% between business, personal, doing things. So your equipment can die at any given point. And like in my last trip to India, I was carrying 2 laptops for that exact reason.
Mm.
Because I'm like, if one dies, I need to have something else that I can use to continue business. But the backup was a key, that the data will be secure constantly so I can be able to bring it back.
Yeah, and that's something that I don't even remember when I started. Just even like for home use, our digital photos of the kids, right, and putting that up into the cloud because just having it on a PC in the house, especially like I mentioned earlier, the ages of the kids. So the first one we actually had a real camera, rather than take the film and drop it off and get pictures developed. But the other two are much more digital, like their entire life history is digital. Um, and it's kind of cute when you get the daily memories pop up, and even Microsoft OneDrive, sends me an email and kind of sent me something that made me smile this morning when I see the three kids, when I don't know, maybe it's like 12, 13 years ago, they were doing something silly, and it shows me the pictures in kind of a daily digest. But when I look at it as a whole, I have over 250,000 digital pictures sitting in OneDrive. And on the side, kind of on my weekends, I fly my drone and take pictures, as a hobby, but also now I've got some side work that I do on that. Um, so I've got about, I think, the 250,000 plus pictures. It's a like 1.67 terabytes of storage in the cloud, right? Like if I lose that, first off, I lose all the memories of the family, right? Which would be bad. Um, the kids wouldn't have the pictures, we wouldn't have the memories, all that kind of stuff. The work product, obviously, for the digital pictures, right? Like I have customers who I send them to the cloud location, they download it. If they were to lose it on their side, they want to go back to the cloud to retrieve it, but now I've lost it and now it's gone. You say, oh, well, you go shoot it again. Well, most part I'm doing construction projects. So I'm capturing different points in time along the construction process in the timeline. You can't go backwards and kind of like unbuild the building and kind of take pictures of what the foundation looked like, right? Like it doesn't work that way. So it is, backing up data is something that we all have a responsibility. I think products like OneDrive have made it easier, integrated as part of the Microsoft 365 suite. If you just let it OneDrive essentially all of your My Documents, pictures, that whole folders group, and put it up there, your two laptop problem in India, right? It's like you could go take a third laptop, sign into it with your Microsoft 365 creds, and you're in, and all your stuff will magically be there. So the cloud is magic. The problem is, beyond that though, what happens if the cloud gets ransomwared, right? And it can happen, right? Because the ransomware can hit your local endpoint and then also encrypt all the stuff that's up in the cloud as well. And so there still needs to be a backup over and above what you're doing as far as cloud storage.
And that it's a great segue to, then you need to, when you protect your data, you need to have a way so you can quickly recover it, that you can quickly have, and like, if you send it, I remember when the original archive platforms were coming up, like when Glacier originally came up. And then there were some third parties that you install on premises. I work on a project for a big company that the retrieval of data could take hours.
Hmm.
So sometimes that's okay because it's not critical data. But I bet that when we want to try to bring something back, it's because we need it like now. So having a solution that provide great uptime, that allow you, like you said, if you're on OneDrive or in your email, that you can recover those files right away. I even remember when I have to mount an Exchange database on a passive server to try to do a recovery of an email. That was painful. Now there's options to be able to do that fairly easy.
Mm-hmm.
But also not only that, when you had to then provide that data for, it may be an endpoint for a customer, that you can have that up and running right away, or a cloud environment. It's sometimes a cost that is not factored in,
Mm-hmm.
but that is really important to maintain uh, availability for that customer.
Yeah, and I'm remembering back to, I don't remember what version of Windows it first came up, but Windows Shadow Copy, remember when that first showed up as a feature, was something that, um, previously, right? Like if you were using Microsoft Office Suite and you accidentally overwrote something, or quite frankly, sometimes the application would have a problem and it would say that, file is corrupt or whatever, can't save it, or, those kind of, and all the work that you just spent hours on is lost. Being able to then go in and right mouse click and say previous versions and then recall a previous version, right? Now you can do it
Yeah,
in the OneDrive interface and all that. We take it for granted that we can do these kind of things. Still, end user awareness of kind of that is pretty low, I think. So having some tools and training around how partners can share and enable that with their end customers is useful, because it's something that, it's so simple. It shouldn't be a help desk ticket, shouldn't be a support call. People should know how to do those things, or they should know that the tools they're using have that capability, and obviously
absolutely.
make good use of it, right? So that they're doing that. The autosave feature in the Microsoft 365 applications, I think, works pretty well and kind of gives people some access to that, but they need to know that. And I think it is, no one has the patience to wait hours for a system restoration, right? They want to be able to just hit a browser, hit restore, open it up side by side. Oh yeah, this is the version that I want to keep, right? And then kind of run forward with that. So again, planning goes into a lot of this, and making sure that the tools are enabled to support what is a very, very common, like every single day kind of scenario that users run through.
And then depend where your data live, understanding where that is really important in today's world, because with all the new regulations that are happening. Like I
Mm-hmm.
remember when GDPR came out, knowing where your data will live, and then people say, "Oh, that doesn't apply to me because I'm on the US." Well, if you serve customers, there may be some regulations that apply if you have customers from that location. Then Brazil applied the same thing, New York, California, and other states. So I think that understanding where the data lives and what you can do with it, like it's really important, because now you can respond to a request. Hey, does anyone have access to the data when I am not there? What happened with the data in the event that there's a disaster? Like, if I have a rogue administrator, what happened? Can they just go and wipe out the whole thing, or what can they do? That's really important too.
Well, and I think it's also figuring out, there's kind of, you're speaking to the international nature of kind of where it is and the data protection rules and privacy and those kind of things that you have to comply with. It can even be simple inside the organization. Let's say that you're planning a merger and acquisition kind of activity, and a select group of people are going to have access to the information, and you put together what you think is a secure share on the network to be able to host those files. How do you know who has access permissions for that, right? How do we know where we're storing this and that we really are securing it appropriately? It could not just be M&A, it could be everyday, finance and sales information. You don't want that available to the broader organization. It could be sensitive HR and payroll information. You don't want available to the entire organization. So there needs to be a structure about data, where it lives, who has access, how do we do security around that, kind of control access, user group, policy management around those kind of things. And then what is the refresh on that? So if someone leaves the organization, do they immediately lose access to that sensitive information so they can't take it with them, or return somehow and access it maybe through a mobile device that was authorized on the network, right? So there needs to be a whole set of procedures around that, and really controlling where data resides and who has access to it.
And you just open the last point for today, and it's like access control is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you have access? What do you do with it? And even though for some people there should be different access than for others, so it's easier to say, hey, do whatever you need, but not everyone needs to have access to install software or to do work on their computer. But understanding what is the proper access control that is needed, it's actually very important. Hey, you need a laptop? Okay, so you're going to be traveling. Are you going to be remote all the time? So you may need some permissions. Versus if you have a desktop environment. Versus, hey, how often are we going to change the password so you can get in? And what's going to be our process? So in the event that you have a need, are you going to have, let's say, you remember the RSA tokens
Oh
that
yeah.
you had to keep with your keys? That they changed and now they became like the two factor and different things. So having all those help protect from all these different cybersecurity situations. And if you look, there are layers. We cannot say that only one will help to solve everything. When we apply all of them or multiple of them, then we're reducing the risk and improving the total cybersecurity resiliency for that company.
Yeah, you never eliminate it, right? Because, as long as the computer exists and a human sits in front of it, there's risk, right? It's just the nature of things. But even, one lesson that I guess I'm embarrassed to share, early in my career working at Microsoft, you get up from your computer for a moment, you go to the printer or you go to get some water or something like that. And I came back one day and the jokester in our group had started up an email message on my screen and addressed it to Bill Gates and said, I need to remember to lock my computer when I walk away or something like that. Now, he didn't send it, right? But he just left it up on the screen. And so, very quickly you learn if you use a Windows computer to press the Windows key and L, and that locks your computer. And you can, then brings back to the sign in screen, right? You just walk away, go do your thing, come back, sign in, right? But I very quickly learned that habit. So it goes back to the end user education piece we talked about earlier, but it is, people take for granted the cybersecurity and all those things. And then you think about physical security. Who has access to the office? Who can walk in the door? Who can then sit in front of a computer that's already signed in? And what can they do? Do we have some basic habits that we teach people about? Lock your box, right, when you walk away, and those kind of things. So, there's no way to completely eliminate the threats, right? There's a lot of things we do to address as many things as we can think about. We use software, we use policies, procedures, we use training, we use monitoring tools. There's so much to it. It's overwhelming at times, right? But there is a process for handling this, and obviously that's what we've talked about today.
Well, my friends, in the description of this live, or if you're watching the recording, you can get the link to the guide that you can download and you can use for yourself, and that you can also use the points for your customers or the people that you work with, because I think that that's the most important thing, learning and sharing it so we all can live on a more secure world. My friends, it's been awesome to see you again, Mike. We'll see you next week here again in Tech Conversation Secrets. Take care, my friends.